Part of Africa's challenges is that there's a huge energy deficit. And some of the questions we're settled with is, what are African policymakers doing about this? Well, today I get a glimpse of those answers. I sit down with the Minister of Energy from Zimbabwe, right here in London, Honorable Minister July Moyo, as he tackles these difficult questions. Join me. Welcome to SAT Interviews with your host, Farai Ian Muvuti. Honorable Minister Moyo, welcome to London. It's such a pleasure and an honor to meet you, and especially coming off the high level of consultations you've been doing here in England. Firstly, we may start with what your program has been and the reception therein. I know that you've been working closely with the UK, the Zimbabwean embassy here, led by His Excellency Ambassador Christian Katsande. Tell me how that has been for you so far in terms of your stay and equally the consultation meetings you've been having.
Well, thank you very much for seeing us. We came here at the invitation of three organizations. First, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and they sent Lord Collins to officially open our workshop and our seminar. And the African Development Bank was part of the organizers, as well as the World Bank. Yes, in the background is the Rockefeller Foundation, because the three of them constitute the Africa Energy 300. Our embassy has been very active with us, both before we presented our compact and after presentation of our compact. We spent the whole day at the embassy seeing follow-ups with prospective investors who wanted more clarifications, and also to see how they can partner with us. So our reception has been very good. The hosts have been very good, both on the British side and our embassy.
And that's quite brilliant. I mean, given the fact that Zimbabwe, over the last 2 decades or so, relations with the UK have been somewhat diminished. But we're seeing a different approach now post the new dispensation. Can you tell us a bit more about that, given the relaxation of be it their sanction position, and equally more importantly, just how they're engaging the country? How have you witnessed that in your ministry so far?
Well, the level of interest by investors, British investors, shows us that there is a thawing of relations, and this is in part and mostly because of our president's call that Zimbabwe is friend to all and enemy to none, and re-engagement. And is beginning to have fruits, and these fruits are manifesting in the investment drive that the British government is urging its private sector and the private sector itself. And the British have already invested in some of the renewable energy in Zimbabwe through intermediaries like Old Mutual.
Well, that's great. And now, of course, you're presenting what you call your national compact, the National Energy Compact here in London. And I'd like you to unpack for us what the key pillars are of this particular compact policy and the key intentions and how one can measure success.
Well, the first compact has 5 pillars. The first pillar is to expand our generation capacity. We have an installed capacity of 2,962 megawatts, but our real supply, because of the aging equipment that we have, both in generation of hydro and thermal, we are not able to do more than 1,600 at any given time. So there's a huge gap. Our peak demand is 1,900, and now with winter, it goes beyond 2,000. So we have a gap because of old equipment, and we have a gap because there is increased activity from industries, from agriculture, from mining, from tourism. So that's why generation is very important. Number 2 is to expand the capacity of trading in the region. We are very fortunate in the Southern African region because in 2015 we crafted a Southern African power pool, And this Southern African power pool trades, and there are 12 countries right now where you can trade. So if you generate in Zimbabwe, and if we have excess, we can always trade to the other 11 countries. So an investor who comes to Zimbabwe, and we are sitting with the Southern African power pool because of our location, and the Southern African power pool is managed in Zimbabwe.
Oh,
And we are the actual hub of that trading. With the interconnector that is coming between Tanzania and Zambia, will also be traded in the Eastern African power pool. So the market has grown and the demand is much larger. All the Southern African countries right now have a deficit because of either old age generation equipment or climate.
climate change.
So trading is very important. The third pillar is to have distributed renewable energy. We want to increase our capacity to have renewable energy so that we can do a transition. We will remain very anchored in hydro and in thermal, but other renewables, although hydro is renewable, we want to increase on solar, we want to increase on wind, we want to increase on biomass, and we want to increase on other renewables, gas that is abundant in Zimbabwe. The fourth is that we want to make sure that the private sector becomes very active. And the private sector in Zimbabwe is already investing in renewable energy and other energy. And we brought some so that when we were presenting our compact, live investors, private sector investors can also talk and tell the others how this is happening. The last is to make sure that we reform our electricity undertakings, and we are already doing that with our ZESA, so that the private sector which comes in can see a reformed ZESA with regulations that allow the private sector to participate. So
Well,
those are the 5 pillars.
and so maybe speaking to that, so of course the Africa Development Bank and the World Bank would have sort of put this together to somewhat see your compact. And I'd like to sort of figure out what the response has been and how Zimbabwe has been able to sort of equally align itself. I think you've pointed that out in terms of your regional strategy and equally your continental strategy, which may feed into the AU agenda. Now, what has been the feedback about, in relation to your compact, and what sort of measurable outcomes can we look forward to?
Well, while we are doing all the efforts to re-engage and to make sure that we clear our legacy debt with the African Development Bank, but we still have constraints of direct funding either from World Bank or from the African Development Bank. So we have crafted our compact in such a manner that with the help of the World Bank and African Development Bank, we can approach the private sector. So there are 2 pillars, there are 2 investors we are looking at. Those investors that are willing, both international and local, to invest in Zimbabwe, and most of these are private sector. And we are looking at some of the Middle Eastern finances, and we are looking at the Asian financing to see whether they can come in and support our program. But the private sector in the West can also support our program. The Minister of Finance and I had a pitch when there was a meeting in Washington, D.C., and we received some very positive feedbacks from even the Americans, and the British have been very good.
And so your ministry with the finance ministry, are you aligned in terms of your policy subsidiary reform agenda and equally the alignment of budgeting and so forth?
Yes, the reforms that the macroeconomic reforms that the country is going through in order to have Vision 2030, which are led by our NDS 1 and now our NDS 2, which is led by the Minister of Finance, we are aligned. So that's why we can do a part series. The minister was unable to come. He was supposed to be here, but his officials were here to answer the macroeconomic issues. But we are aligned in the sense that while they are doing the macro, we are doing the energy sector reforms. And that's why we are doing energy policy. We are doing energy efficiency policy. We are doing a planning so that we know where we are going.
In a world that never stops, you need a connection that keeps up.
Introducing Clear Mobitel's UK eSIM and SIM solution, designed for the modern traveller, professional and digital native.
Stay connected wherever life takes you with Clear Mobitel's ultra-fast, reliable eSIM and SIM services. No more swapping SIM cards. Activate your eSIM in seconds and enjoy seamless, uninterrupted connectivity. Whether you're at home, at work or on the go, Clear Mobitel gives you fast data and crystal clear calls. No boundaries, no interruptions. Perfect for those who need high-speed data for business, entertainment, or everything in between.
And for those exploring the UK, say goodbye to roaming charges. Clear Mobitel keeps you connected without the extra cost.
Clear Mobitel, a new way to connect anytime, anywhere.
Now, in as far as Zimbabwe is concerned, I think one of the challenges that a lot of our readers and a lot of investors tend to share a lot of concern about is policy clarity. And it's always been a quagmire because one minute there's an SI, then next minute there isn't. My question to you would be, what is sort of the work you've done towards reforming that and creating a culture of clarity over the last 12 months or so? And what are we looking towards in terms of, a sustained policy framework in which we can begin to prepare for the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, let me answer that to an investor. In the crafting of this compact, which has been an inclusive process, we have gone to the Reserve Bank to clarify the de-risking of foreign currency and its volatility, and how an investor will end up getting their money either to pay their loans or their dividend. That is very clear now. And anybody who has any doubts, we take them to sit with the governor, and he is very flexible on it. Okay. Then the major de-risking, which is the macroeconomic stability, we also sit with the Ministry of Finance, and whichever investor would have questions, we like to them to talk to directly to the Ministry of Finance. So on that score, the consistency that we have got and the assurance that we have given to investors who are already there. For instance, we had one investor who is in the mini hydro in the Eastern Highlands, and he was able to explain to say when he wants his foreign currency for buying equipment, he has no problems. The banks are now on site, and if you want your escrow account so that you can easily take your money, all these things have been put in place. So at macro level, the Ministry of Finance is stabilizing the economy, inflation is stabilizing foreign currency, and at sector level, we are doing all the regulations that we need for reform.
And I suppose maybe connecting directly to that question of around policy consistency, I think it's also important to understand the tariff regime of any particular market you're going into. Maybe give us a sense of an outlay of what that looks like in Zimbabwe, and if you're entering the market in Zimbabwe, how you're setting up, and equally if you are to say you want to, let's say you want to build a data center, and you want to have an understanding of, let's say, the tariff regime they're in, and how and the potential return therein. How would one look at that within that context?
We have been working very hard with our regulatory authority, ZERA, Zimbabwe Regulatory Authority, together with the ZIDA, and they are going to put on the ZIDA website how to apply for power generation.
For the purposes of for listeners, ZIDA is your Zimbabwe Investment Development Agency, which is your one-stop shop of investment.
Correct. So we are doing this so that it can be clarified on their website. It will show you the tariff regime. And we believe right now government has done extremely well by having a cost-reflective tariff for ZESA.
So let's explore that cost-reflective tariff,
Yes.
because the major question is, if we're looking at the market, you're looking at the regional market.
Yes.
You're equally looking at the continental market.
Yes.
Are we competitive, and what does that mean? Cost-reflective.
We are very competitive, and when we check with the regional market in terms of tariff, maybe we are second only to one in terms of the cost reflectiveness.
Okay.
Because of our mixture of hydro and thermal, and then our solar, which is still very low at 7.8% of the total market, we are very competitive. But what it means that an investor can come for generation, they will see a cost reflective tariff of generation, depending on what source of energy they are wanting to use. If they are using thermal, we can tell them the band. If they are using solar, we can also tell them. If they are using mini hydro, because mini hydro, unfortunately, are a little bit more costly. So they will go higher than others. So all this we already have. Now, those who are generating for their own use, but they are transmitting through our power system, our transmission system and distribution system, we also have a price which they can see. We have gone even further because we have a lot of conurbations in town, let alone in the rural areas. There are many places where there is no electricity, and we are wanting to attract investors to come to Caledonia and invest directly and become a mini ZESA by buying bulk, reticulate, distribute, and collect on for yourself as a business. So there is a cost-reflective tariff for that part of the business also.
I want to unpack that even further, because I think you cite a good example. So Caledonia Mining, for context sake, is a private business, a private mining.
Caledonia town.
The town itself.
Yes.
Okay, but so in terms of, okay, let's explore that.
Yes.
So the independence, so the independent power producer can then generate their own power.
Yes.
And they have the option of either using that power that they've generated within the Zimbabwean market, selling directly to the national distributor, who is ZESA in this context, or choose to offshore it, offtake it elsewhere, be it Zambia or Namibia and so forth. Now, in terms of the financing of it, talk to me about that and the structure therein. So if I'm producing power, let's say in Caledonia at the location, and I'm taking that power into, let's say, Namibia, for instance, and the offtake agreement is there, could I use that offtake agreement to then access financing in Zimbabwe to then build my infrastructure?
Financing can be sourced anyway. For the international financier, when you are now generating power in order to have a company in Zambia, as we do now, a company in Zambia which is wanting security of supply, and you have an agreement with them, you can go to your bank, it gives you assurance. What you then do with our power utility ZESA is, in order for you to reach your client in Zambia, you need to transmit it through our transmission and distribution system, just as you need to transmit it through ZESCO in Zambia. So that transmission charge is what you will be paying. That's what you will be agreeing with ZESA. That's the first thing. If you also have a company in Zimbabwe, and there are others, Blanket Mine, for instance, they found an investor who put a power station, solar, and they are selling to Blanket Mine. But they need distribution line, which is owned by ZESA. They agree with ZESA how much they are going to pay for the distribution line, but their off-taker is Blanket Mine. So the investor who is supporting this solar system knows Blanket Mine is a gold mine. They are going to be exporting. They are assured of their money. So those, but if you now want the third one, where you are actually saying, I am selling to ZESA. I'm putting 100 mega power station, but I'm selling to ZESA. You sign a power purchase agreement with ZESA. And this is where the cost reflective tariff kicks in, and you sign an agreement and you sell to ZESA. Now, the thing that people have been asking is, how will I get my money if ZESA is being paid in ZIG or is paid in US? That is the person that I have said both the Reserve Bank and the Minister of Finance has come in to make sure that they are de-risking.
Now, and it's quite good because you've given me a sense of assurance around the access to the grid. Because I think independent power producers, what we call our IPPs, tend to struggle when it comes to issues relating to licensing, licensing delays, and so forth. Now, what sort of work have you done to sort of alleviate that in terms of the registration process itself?
What we have done when we presented our compact is to assure the investors. Here is a list of independent power producers who have come. They have a license, they have a power purchase agreement, but they are failing to have financial closure. That's why we're coming to you as financiers, both domestic and international, that the processing is now assured. And we have reformed.
But what if one chooses to do it independently and they don't want to work with the listed
Yeah, we are saying it is now very well reformed. You go through two processes, right, or two institutions. One is our ZERA and the regulator. They have promised us that they can give you a license within the shortest period possible, and they are doing it. The next one is for your power purchase agreement. Your power purchase agreement is with ZESA. And again, we are meeting and making sure that it is also done in the shortest period. The only thing that you need is to have your feasibility study, your grid impact assessment, and these will be given to you very hastily.
So the grid impact assessment, of course, is done independently by the company itself?
By the company, but by ZESA also.
Okay, so you work, and is there a cost impact to that when you're working alongside ZESA?
No, ZESA is doing the grid impact because where you position your power generation has a greater meaning to ZESA because where you join the grid, they have to do the impact assessment. We have just done one for a floating solar generation in Kariba. And we have had to take a little bit more time because this is a new site and it's a big one. And it is going to go into the line that is coming from Kariba. So they have had to work together, but they have agreed. But for thermals, say in somebody who is doing it in Munyati, it doesn't take long because the power systems are already there.
And how are you structuring your power purchasing agreements for international finances to understand? Because I think one of the areas that you'll want is, in as much as you've dealt with the independent power producers and so forth, but how are you structuring the the power purchase agreements themselves to make them bankable for your international finances?
Well, as I said, once you have a cost-reflective tariff
right
at the end user, the generation costs are well known. If you are doing hydro, if you are doing solar, if you are doing thermal, your transmission line and distribution is now consistent, and we can tell you what the transmission costs are going to be. If you are wanting to do retail, we can also do. So we have tried to disaggregate so that the cost-reflective tariff, whatever point you enter, you know exactly what you are supposed to do. Okay. And it is in the power purchase agreement.
And so that gives a sense of clarity to
the
investor themselves. Now, looking at the local generation capacity itself, Zimbabwe has had quite a large gap in as far as its shortfall in terms of deficit, and which is of course a regional reality. It's Zambia is going through it and so forth. What are the plans to ensure, especially in the rise of urban corridors within the country themselves? I know that there's a clear strategy to sort of have an urban to rural, but that's still a maturing policy and action in itself nationally. But in terms of the local capacity, when you see the growth of the urban area, what are we doing to close that gap, to close that deficit?
Well, as I indicated, we now have a gap in the urban areas of over 600,000 households with no electricity. Is because in the last 20 years, we allowed developers, the built-up environment developers to develop without putting electricity. This was a policy before the new dispensation, but when we then came in, we said, no, we must have electricity. But we have a backlog of 600,000. This is where we are also calling private investors, including developers, to say, just as you are putting sewerage, you are putting water, you are putting roads, the next thing is you must put electricity. But it's a business. We don't want you to do, it's a business. It's a business that
also,
you can
so
do.
you're allowing the private sector to actually play
Exactly.
into the urban
Yeah,
area.
that's why we say bulk metering. Okay. If you went to Gimboki in Mutare, which has no electricity, and we are talking about more than 10,000 households, and we give you a bulk distribution license, which can be given by ZERA, and you have an agreement with ZESA, then you are build either an 11 kV substation or a 33 kV or a 0.4 kV. And if you get that, then you can do the reticulation, you can do the collection, and you are just build bulk. So you become a mini ZESA.
I see. So you're devolving it by liberalizing the market.
Yes.
And I suppose with your background in having worked in local government, you're sort of well placed in this sense because you have a sort of a holistic approach to the entire grid and the urban area as well.
Well, not just the urban area. You see, we with our distributed energy, we are looking at households in the rural areas, for instance. Mm-hmm. We are looking at businesses in the rural areas. We are looking at rural service centers. We are looking at mining. A lot of our artisanal miners who are doing very well, but they don't have access to energy, commercial energy. They are using fuel generators too, and it's expensive. So if you went and put a solar for them, just like I have told you, blanket mine, yes, put solar. Mm-hmm. This is business.
In a world that never stops, you need a connection that keeps up.
Introducing Clear Mobitel's UK eSIM and SIM solution, designed for the modern traveller, professional and digital native.
Stay connected wherever life takes you with Clear Mobitel's ultra-fast, reliable eSIM and SIM services. No more swapping SIM cards. Activate your eSIM in seconds and enjoy seamless, uninterrupted connectivity. Whether you're at home, at work or on the go, Clear Mobitel gives you fast data and crystal clear calls. No boundaries, no interruptions. Perfect for those who need high-speed data for business, entertainment, or everything in between.
And for those exploring the UK, say goodbye to roaming charges. Clear Mobitel keeps you connected without the extra cost.
Clear Mobitel, a new way to connect anytime, anywhere.
Okay, so I get that, and yeah, a very lucrative business. Maybe it leads me to another area, and which I think you've covered quite well. But looking at Kariba, for instance, that you had touched upon with the new technology you're talking about, the floating technology you're talking about in terms of alternative energy, we've got sort of aged equipment there in Kariba, and I'm sort of and Wange as well, and we've often been trying to fill up the gap in terms of the hydro energy. When there's water, there's energy. When there's no water, there's no energy, and our capacity is always somewhat limited. What are we doing to resolve that particular issue in terms of the units in Kariba and Wange, and also what are in terms of the aspirations? What I've seen, are the targets equally sufficient, considering that you have now a growing manufacturing base SME, growing, SME base as well. Are you actually rethinking about the targets that you're sort of looking at?
Well, let me deal with the hydro, which is mostly based on Kariba, although we have many hydros and small hydros like in Tirikwi and Tugwimkosi.
Yeah.
All our dams now we can do hydropower.
Yeah.
And there are investors who are already interested
And
are investing. But your big Zambezi potentially can produce more than 10,000 megawatts. Let's look at Batoka. Even if you downsized it to 2,000 or 3,000, it's a huge impact for both Zambia and ourselves. So downstream from Batoka, there's another gorge, and there's another gorge before you reach Kanyemba. All these are generation potential that is on the Zambezi between Zambia and ourselves, and we are looking at it. But we are aware of climate change. The big reservoir like Kariba is no longer a viable one. Yeah. Because even now, with the rains that we got, we are still at 18% of Kariba. But we try now to have a run of the river, small holding reservoirs in order to increase the pressure for generation. And that's what we are looking at. But our thermal is also dependable, and we have abundance of it. I've just told you in Bite Bridge, we have abundance of it. In Chirezi area, there are investors now who want to go into the Chirezi area. They are already doing steel. So now they see another opportunity. They own still an iron ore mine. They have two plants that are doing steel in Kwekwe and in Masvingo. And now they are saying, but we are sitting on coal. And they have a concession in coal. So they are going to invest in coal. So coal will remain our mainstay for a long time to come. But we need clean coal. We need the technology to change so that while we are using this coal, we clean it. And so our greenhouse gas emissions are less than what is happening right now.
Now, of course, I suppose I harken back to London, given this is where we are. In light of the core argument, there's a big issue here in London when they're talking about, energy transition. And I understand the need for us to clearly be thinking about, how we transition, but simultaneously meet our current energy demands. And I completely understand that argument. But in the context of energy transition, given the impact of climate change in our country itself and the region as a whole, what are the strategies so far to start, so somewhat start thinking about accessing funding from, these just energy transition and the green financing and so forth? Is there a discussion around that when you're having your interactions with the African Development Bank and the World Bank itself?
Yes. We want to increase our renewable minus hydro to 29% from 7.8%, which we are doing right now. So we want to increase it. In order to increase it, we need all the carbon funders to come in. And the Ministry of Environment has just published a regulation that covers the green funds as well as the carbon credits, so that while we have not been using it very effectively, but we are now alive to it, and there's a policy document that the government has now produced.
And so in terms of carbon credits and in terms of accessing that, it's a great opportunity, I think, because
Yes.
quite a number of African countries do not utilize their carbon credits.
Correct.
And so we have an opportunity to sell our carbon credits to bigger markets. And that's probably another way to finance our energy gaps. And I like the fact that you guys are thinking deliberately about it. But are there any takers so far?
They are, but on a smaller scale. That's why with these regulations, we have had to hire experts from Europe and others to craft how we can do this. And I'm sure in the next few months, there will be a larger uptake, because the consciousness is now there, both in government and in the leading organizations such as the Ministry of Environment. And most of it obviously will go for energy. Energy is the big taker of these carbon credits.
No, no, Minister, and thank you so much for indulging me in this. And I like the fact that there's a clear direction in as far as green energy is concerned, and that equally you're thinking about how to invite that particular investment. Now, maybe as I round up my questioning, I think energy is such a big issue within the region, and you do understand that when it comes to when we talk about value addition, when we talk about creating greater value chains, Africa or Pan-Africanists tend to argue that we need to be doing our own refinery, we need to be doing our own, and part of the deterrence for a lot of investment is that, well, I can't come build the infrastructure and then build the refinery to help you and build your employment, yet my bottom line is hit. Is there any way government is meeting investors halfway with an interest, if they come with an interest to create value, but there's an energy deficit? How are you meeting investors halfway in that regard when it comes to value addition?
Wow. Our government, in order to have Vision 2030, is emphasizing on value addition in agriculture, in mining, in tourism, in manufacturing. And this value addition is premised on the fact that investors who come to Zimbabwe are already getting financing from operations in Zimbabwe. Why don't you go the next step and the next step? Where do you get your overall financing? You can go to international capital markets, but our capital markets are very buoyant also. And a lot of people during these discussions here, I was very happy. I went to one session where they were talking about local capital markets. And we happen to have a very buoyant pension schemes, insurance schemes, and we have not been tapping into this. Our banks, we have not been doing much in order to invest, say, in energy. Because energy is such an enabler. As long as your energy supply curve is lower than the demand curve, people won't have confidence to come and invest. So we need to have our energy supply curve, which is higher than the demand curve. And that, once it happens, you will see a lot of people wanting to invest in value chain. Because your value chain takes a little bit more electricity than your primary produce.
Precisely.
So all these, we are now having discussions. The economic cluster for which energy is also a part, although we are also a part to the social cluster, because schools, clinics must be looked at. But in the economic cluster, we are now beginning to say, what is the demand for value addition in agriculture? And how do we meet this demand in energy? What is the demand in mining value chain? So, coordinated by a very well-structured cabinet system, we think we can attack this. And we are also talking to the private sector, those who are engaged in energy and those who are engaged in agriculture. For instance, cabinet has now said, ZESA, as part of our reforms, go and do smart metering and prepaid metering in the whole economy, so that ZESA's predictability of income to tackle the energy demands with this cost-reflective tariff is assured.
So there can never be this excuse about, well, no, we have no money.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they have said by October, ZESA will have put farmers on prepaid, government ministries on prepaid, parastatals on prepaid. The private sector, a lot of it is also on prepaid, but domestic right now is the most prepaid sector.
So it's not fair currently.
It's not fair.
Yeah.
So that is in order to make sure that there is access to international finance, because they can see that the collection is there. The last thing is our interconnectors. We are aware that an investor who wants to come to Zimbabwe and can saturate the market in Zimbabwe must trade outside. So we have interconnectors that are now being pushed by SADC. I'll be chairing a meeting at the end of this month into first week of July of all SADC countries, because Zimbabwe is chair of SADC. So
Congratulations, brother. Yeah.
my sector will be chairing it. So our Southern African Power Pool is already working with SADC itself to say, what about this MOSISA, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and South Africa interconnector? It's very important. It needs financing, and SADC has created a fund for this type of thing. Then we have Sizobona, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Botswana, and Namibia. All these interconnectors, including the interconnector between Malawi and Zambia and Mozambique, which is already being financed, and the one between Tanzania and Zambia, that one is the Tanzanian side is almost complete, and the Zambia one has now been financed. Then there's an interconnector between Angola and Zambia. Then there is the interconnector which includes all of us, but looking at power generation from Inga in DRC. All these are on the table so that we strengthen the market, but we also strengthen the marketability of electricity, and that invites investors at a big scale.
And I suppose, Minister, what you've quite elucidated for us is we often criticize the region of not being interconnected enough. But clearly, there's a lot of work being done there in that regard.
Yes.
And what's your commentary on the Africa Free Trade as you within the context of your ministry, and given the infrastructural gap as well as the energy deficit, and how much energy would need to close that infrastructural gap? What role are we playing as a country?
And I'm not being self-praising. The Southern African Power Pool is the most advanced of the 3 or 4 power pools in Africa. And we are now starting to talk to other power pools. The Eastern Africa Power Pool. Once we interconnect with Zambia and Tanzania, you can access Somalia, you can access the Great Lakes region, and ultimately you can access Egypt. So that is doing very well for the Africa vision of 2063. And we are saying it also assists us in terms of the African trade, because once we start trading in energy, it gives impetus to other trading. But for Southern Africa, we are already so lucky because our road network and our railway network, once we revive our railway networks, you can actually have a wagon from Cape Town to Dar es Salaam without changing that wagon because the meter gauge is the same. You can have that wagon from Dar es Salaam into Banguela in Angola because we are already interconnected. So our railway system is also interconnected. Our communications is also integrated. So SADC has been working at these interconnections, but now expanding through Tanzania into East Africa, and in some cases through DRC into Central Africa. And before we know, we must reach West Africa.
Well, Minister, with that, I want to thank you for your time and to equally say welcome yet again to London. And I hope that you enjoy the rest of your stay. But with that, thank you so much for joining me here at the Southern African Times.
You are most welcome.
Thank you
We'll
so
see
much,
you in
Minister.
Zimbabwe.
See you soon.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard it here first. We've had a very interactive discussion with the Minister here of Energy from Zimbabwe, Honorable Minister July Moyo. Now, you must stay tuned. There's much more interesting content coming up very soon, and I hope you keep locked in. But as for now, your host, Farai Muvuti, I'm out.